Okay, hello everybody, and thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for being here tonight. Welcome to the School of Art. It's good to see you here live in Dudley Recital Hall on the University of Houston campus, and also welcome to those of you on Instagram. Again, thank you too for your patience. I am Beckham Dossett, the director of the School of Art, and tonight we wrap up our fall visiting speaker series with an amazing guest as we welcome Mary Maggic. But first, we'll be back here in February with 3 more speakers in the spring. We have a designer, Liza Inibis, photographer William Camargo, and sculptor Samara Golden. You can check out all of those folks in the lineup on our School of Art website. And all of our past speakers for the last few years, as well as this speaker tonight, Mary tonight, will be online on our YouTube channel, so go there. And so let's get right to it. I'm going to introduce Professor John Reed, who's going to introduce Mary Maggic. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you. Given the time, we're going to do, actually everybody knows that I hate really long introductions, so, and I never do them anyway. So Mary Maggic has come all the way from Vienna to speak with us tonight, having slightly more trouble with the last 30 miles than the first couple thousand. Thank you for arriving. Thank you to the team who eventually got here, and to probably Texas Department of Transportation or something, who knows. Mary, I believe, received their master's from MIT, has participated in Ars Electronica. I'm just going to tear through this. Received a 2022 Knight Arts and Tech Fellowship, Fulbright residency, blah, blah, blah. So many wonderful things. And they work at the intersection, the fuzzy intersection, excuse me, of body and gender politics and capitalist ecological alienations. I'm just going to leave it to you to explain that. We are super excited to have you here, so come on up and let's get started. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for your patience. I'm really excited to be here, especially because yeah, I'm just happy to be on US soil. Like, I know that sounds weird, but I've just been living in Europe, living and working in Europe for the last 5.5 years now. So yeah, it feels good to be, you know, in familiar territory. So I have a pretty long talk planned. I have also some videos embedded. So yeah, I think we can just get started. Okay. So I've kind of divided up this talk into 3 parts. So part 1, an existential knowing. So this is how I would define biohacking now, as a form of existential knowing. But when I first got involved in the biohacking community movement practice back in 2012, 2013, I had a completely different definition. So this is like my most current definition based on, I don't know, the last like 9 years of experience like in this field. So I would define it now as a cultivation of knowledge that comes with the immeasurable lived experiences of embodiment, relationality, and vulnerability. From these experiential ways of learning and being together, biohacking must be framed as a social material practice of knowledging, one that activates through accidents and mishaps, co-generative play and jamming, public amateurism, and collective world making. So I'm going to try to unpack that now in this part 1 of the talk. Okay. So I started my entry into bioart, biohacking, actually through a documentary project that I co-initiated in 2013. And the project is called Dissect, D-I-Y-S-E-C-T. And we turned it into a documentary series, so the episodes are like 15 minutes long. But basically we did this like 3-month road trip, filming and interviewing all these biohackers, bioartists, and essentially we were interested in the cultural and social and political implications of biotechnology, namely synthetic biology. But we wanted to show that through the lens and the perspectives of these practitioners. You know, artists who are really like pushing the boundaries of bioart, and like on a philosophical level, on an aesthetic level, and even on a biopolitical level. And then also these members of the DIY bio movement who are actually trying to start like community biolabs and bring science to a more democratized and decentralized space. So we thought that this was a really interesting movement, and we wanted to bring those two worlds together. And then it was from this project that I got to meet these really amazing, pioneering artists like Sub Rosa, who they're like a cyber feminist collective that they were very active in the 90s and early 2000s. But what they did was they did lots of projects where they used performative tactics to talk about biotechnology and like commodification of bodies and like marketing towards women and like reproductive technologies. So these were very controversial topics at the time, and they were bringing these topics to the public sphere. And really, in these performative strategies, they were basically deconstructing the discourses, the rhetorics around biotechnology. So I find these works to be really powerful. And then, moving on to Critical Art Ensemble, you're probably familiar with them. They were very active around the same time as Sub Rosa, but the project that really hit home for me was a project called Molecular Invasion, which they did in 2002, very pioneering at the time. So what they did was they basically reverse engineered Monsanto's soybean crop so it's no longer resistant to the pesticide. So it was really the first time that they could prove in the public sphere that an organism could be hacked and reversed and used for social resistance. So this was very, very groundbreaking at the time, and that's really, I guess, really what influenced my practice today. So then fast forward to 2014, so I got involved with the Hackteria network through this event that happened in Indonesia, in Jogja. So Hackteria is actually a network, it's a global network on open source biological art. And I really love the philosophy and ethos of the Hackteria network because they came out of this notion of like, well, why does bioart have to be so hard and expensive? Like, why does it have to be like a 10 years collaboration with a scientific group and you need all these resources? And so for them, it's like anyone can do bioart and anyone can do it like in a non futuristic or utopian way. Like biohacking can just be fermenting in the kitchen. Like it's nothing inherently new or futuristic. Like we've always been biohackers. So I really like their philosophy, and I just want to show a really short clip of the events that happened in Jogja in Indonesia, because it's really hard to describe. You just have to see it. So I'm going to show a really short clip now. yeah, for me it's really important to show this type of perspective because I feel like biohacking and bioart tends to be very like Western focused. You know, like all of the discourse like comes from the U.S. or from Europe. So to have this event be hosted in Indonesia, I think was super important because first of all, they don't have all the crazy machines that we have. And that was very explicit, like when we were organizing this event was like, don't bring your laser cutters and all of this fancy equipment that can't be locally sourced. So we really try to pay attention to like the local context and like what the local people actually cared about. So we focused on their issues. So for example, they're interested in like the river pollution or like biodiversity conservation. So we weren't just like these white Western people like coming in with our like savior solutions. And what I also really love about this event was that it was so just like self-organized, like this term workshopology. I'm gonna use this term a lot, but workshopology, it kind of just emerged out of the whole Hackteria style of doing things because people would just like yell out like workshop and then like we just had a board where we wrote down like, okay, I want to do a workshop on making balloons or like plant tissue culturing or like building a 3D printer. And like all this stuff would happen simultaneously in the same space. And so you had this like really radical remixing of disciplines and knowledges. So you have this like really intense like cross-contamination and like here they're making dildos. Like it's just like whatever knowledge you have is valid knowledge and you're welcome to share it. So this was a very like, since this event happened, I haven't been to any event that even matched the energy that was felt here. So I really try to show this in all of my talks. And then from this event, that's where I got to know the trans hack feminist movement, or I guess it's a smaller kind of collective. And they also do this practice called Punk Lab. So what they do is a lot of DIY gynecology practices. They also build like hardware, so like that's a DIY centrifuge when you want to separate like cell samples. And then the picture on the very left is a 3D printed speculum, which is what they use in the gynecology office. So they're really trying to push the boundaries of like what kind of knowledge you can learn about your own body without having a doctor like be the gatekeeper of your body. So they're based out of this, it's like a eco-industrial post-capitalist colony outside of Barcelona. And a lot of the members actually don't live there anymore because, you know, collectives fell apart. But they're still pretty active in like giving workshops and stuff. So I'm gonna show another kind of short clip now because I went to go film one of these events that they hosted called Hack the Earth. And this was also like self-organized and they hosted it at this colony. So like, you know, everything was falling apart and yeah, anyways, you'll see, so.
That's full of one food.
What's interesting is that we house a lot of diversity of microorganisms, but in the lab we try to separate them and isolate them. And also the yogurt is not just one bacteria, it's multiple bacteria. So it's an interesting process because here we're going to start looking for single type.
Y películas de teatro. Y después todo esto, entonces me hablas de un mundo. Adoro. Entrarlo con los movimientos. Brutal, así se llama. Ya. Ya, es como así. Oye, vamos.
Ponerlo aquí antes que directamente y después ya donde estaba el otro.
Se sabe.
Anarca, Lucy y Betsy. ¿Por qué las nombran? ¿Vale? Porque en esa época, bueno, en esa época en Estados Unidos, con el feminismo, pues cada estado tenía un código negro que le llamaban, o el slave code, ¿no? El código de esclavos, que era lo que en el fondo cómo se regían, pues yo qué sé, cómo tenían que regirse los esclavos, ¿no? Y pues me leí el de Alabama,
Okay, so Clau, who was just the last person speaking, she's been doing a lot of research about modern gynecology and the history of these basically white men who experimented on black slaves, oftentimes without anesthesia. And so she's doing this radical renaming project where she's proposing that we rename the glands that are currently labeled in biology textbooks to label these female glands that are responsible for ejaculation. So she wants to rename them after the names of the slaves who were experimented on, so Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. So I think it's really powerful what's happening here as a form of knowledge production, because first of all, like, these women are doing microbiology and like sterile technique and like isolating lactobacillus from vaginal samples, and the whole idea is to make yogurt, right? Like yogurt, like a natural form of yogurt that could like feed your community, you know. So this is, for me, it's like, how is this not any more valid than like what you read in textbooks or like what scientists publish in like scientific journals? You know, like this is like the experiential knowledge that I was talking about in the first slide. You know, this is like, you know, we're all like together, being together, learning and doing and failing together and producing knowledge at the same time. So like if I could reverse my, like go back in time and re-educate myself, like I would definitely learn microbiology in this context and this setting versus like in a classroom, you know, like, so that's what I want us to like think about when we're talking about like hacking, right? Like biohacking, right? We're not just hacking the scientific and the technical, but we're also hacking the way that knowledge gets produced, right? So since I met the trans hack feminists, we actually collaborated on the open source estrogen project, which is a project that I co-initiated in 2015. So this is kind of a collaborative residency that we did in Madrid in 2016. And here's just like an overview of the installation that we made. So we tried to make it very like process oriented, and we showed lots of our mistakes, like all of our polarity experiments gone wrong. We accidentally exploded a huge bottle of sulfuric acid. So we try to show like all of this messiness of biology, right? And this kind of leads me into, yeah, the open source estrogen project. So these are all the terms that, you know, I like to use to describe this practice, but probably the term I like the most is public amateurism. So this term I found out about through an artist named Claire Pentecost, who collaborated really frequently with Critical Art Ensemble, especially on the Molecular Invasion project. So she defines public amateurism as the process of learning and doing and failing in the public sphere and kind of removing the hierarchy of the layperson and the expert. So I find this to be like a very inherently political act to actually produce knowledge outside of institutional boundaries. And also to do it in this non-hierarchical way, right? which is exactly what we have going on in the classroom setting. So, so going into open source estrogen, I'm going to start with this quote. "We did not find sex hormones somewhere in the lost corner, like a desert island lost in the mist. We ourselves called sex hormones into existence." So this is a quote from Ian Hacking in a book called Representing and Intervening. And I really like this quote because it really alludes to the way we tend to categorize things in a scientific way, and then that's how knowledge and meaning gets produced in a symbolic way. So what I mean by that is, okay, so when I first started the project, the first thing I did was I typed in the word estrogen into Google image search. And these are the images that popped up. So this is like a screenshot. So as you can see, like, this really gives you an idea of the public's relationship with estrogen, right? So a lot of it's like mediated through the pharmaceutical industry. You have all these pills, these products, consumerist products, and then there's also lots of images that allude to femininity, right? Like larger breast size, smoother skin. So I became curious, like, how did we arrive at this black box fact that estrogen produces femininity and testosterone produces masculinity? Because essentially what you've done is you've assigned a gender to these molecules, right? Like, how did we as a society arrive at this, right? And like, how can we hack these definitions? Like, how can we hack what femininity means, what masculinity means? So as I started researching further into this project, I realized that, well, there's already estrogen all around us, not exactly like natural estrogen, but like synthetic forms of estrogen that are estrogen mimicking or like hormone disrupting, endocrine disrupting. So all of these are basically residues of industrial capitalism, and they're so pervasive and they're so ubiquitous that they even find PCBs at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, you know, in the Pacific Ocean. It's like the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. So theoretically, there is no organism on this planet that can escape exposure to these toxicities. And the reason why I'm framing it as a molecular colonization is because I'm trying to pose the question of, well, what does it mean to decolonize our bodies and our environments and the planetary, right? So I'm just gonna zoom in to like the molecular scale. So this is what I call like the molecular semiosphere. Semiosphere basically describes the communication that happens between molecules and receptors. So the green receptor, that's the estrogen receptor, scientists describe it as being highly promiscuous, which is kind of a funny way to describe a receptor, but what they mean is that it's like a lock that has many keys. So that's why like all of these residues of capitalist industry, like they're actually communicating to our receptors in a very passive way. Like we didn't intend, you know, for this communication to happen, but it's happening. Like they're binding to our receptors, they're disrupting our endocrine systems. And another really interesting fact about the receptor is that it's highly conserved among all animal taxa. And what that means is that if you just think back to this like very ancient organism that first evolved a vertebrae, and then like all the other species that evolved after that with the vertebrae, so like the entire like animal kingdom basically. So we all have the same estrogen receptor. It's highly conserved. So that's why you also hear the stories of like the frogs and the fish and the bird populations are all like declining because of exposure to atrazine or all these other pesticides or chemicals. It's because we all have the same receptor. Like we're all vulnerable to these molecules. So when I first started open source estrogen, my main goal was just like, how can I hack these molecules? And what I mean by hack is how can I detect them? How can I extract them? I also thought about synthesis, but that's another story. So the first thing I looked into was using these biosensors as a very low-cost way of detecting these toxicities. So these are transgenic yeast. So I just took some beer yeast, and then I, from a friend, from a biohacker friend, I found out about this plasmid, which is a circular piece of DNA, and it codes for the human estrogen receptor. And I inserted this into the yeast. So basically the yeasts are acting as extensions of our bodies because they have the same receptor as we do. And they're able to turn yellow in the presence of these molecules. So that lets me know, like, that's basically like, you know, being able to visualize the molecular semiosis, like the communication that's happening. So this was really mind-blowing for me to like actually visualize this communication happening. And from that protocol, we had to come up with a solid phase extraction protocol because we wanted to test dilute water samples. Like if you collect a river sample, it's actually super dilute, and so you have to concentrate all of the toxicities into this small filter before you can give it to the yeast. And then from this extraction protocol, then we're like, okay, now we have a rough idea of how extraction works, so how can we do it for something like urine? Because urine is full of hormones that we just don't use, and then we just pee them out. So it's like, okay, how can we extract it from our bodies, like from urine? So this is actually the protocol that I'm gonna do in the workshop on Thursday. So it's super simple. As you can see, there's only 4 steps. So think of it as a kitchen recipe. And we are using very, very easy to find ingredients like silica gel, cigarette filters. Maybe the hardest thing to find is methanol because it's kind of toxic. But we also are going to construct our own laboratory equipment. So there's a bit of hardware hacking as well. So this is an image of what the hormones look like after they've been extracted from the urine. So it's like this brown sticky stuff. And we like to do like a smell test. And it's kind of a very intimate thing to like smell the hormones of someone else. But essentially they're acting as pheromones because they are hormones that are outside of the body. And it's really interesting because it kind of influences you in a neurological way. It's very similar to dogs because when dogs are smelling each other's butts, they're actually smelling the hormones that are left behind in the urine and the feces. So if we have enough time to get to this smell part of the workshop, then I think you'll know what I mean by this kind of animalistic reaction. And then from this protocol, the urine extraction protocol, I kind of adapted it into this speculative fiction film called Housewives Making Drugs. And in this film, the main characters, Maria and Maria, they are trans femme hosts of the show, and they're teaching the audience at home how to extract hormones and use them for gender transition therapy. That's kind of the fictional part because you actually can't transition your gender from urinary hormones, but it's kind of just pushing that idea of what's possible through biohacking. So I'm just gonna show a really short clip of this film, and you can find it also on Vimeo if you just type it in. So.
Hello, and welcome to our show. I'm Maria.
And I'm Maria.
And we are Housewives Making Drugs. On today's show, Maria and I are going to show you lovely viewers at home how to get hormones without needing that pesky doctor's prescription.
That's right, Maria. We've concocted a recipe where we can reuse the estrogen that's naturally expelled from our bodies.
So you're saying that this recipe would allow us to circumvent the whole industrial medical complex?
And increase access to estrogen for trans women to gain radical body autonomy.
Wow. By sharing hormones interdependent community?
And taking the phrase sharing is caring to a whole new level.
Wow. What do we need to make all of this happen?
This, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary, agender, and gender non-conforming folks, is the Astrofeminizer.
The only tool a real estrogen hacker needs to do her deed.
The best part is, all these ingredients are cheap and easy to find.
Just how I like my men.
It's made up of silica gel and cigarette filters, layered inside a modified glass bottle.
As you can see, I found these items after a heavy night of drinking and smoking.
Never mind that overpriced laboratory equipment. This is a DIY contraption for all you biohackers out there.
Whoa, hold up. Biohacking? That sounds scary.
Well, no, just think of it as something as simple as making beer or wine or even cheese.
Okay, Maria, so you're saying that we have always been biohackers?
Exactly, Maria. So to get started, we're going to need just one more very special ingredient.
We will tell you right after a quick but essential break.
So the whole thing is like 10 minutes long, so I encourage you to watch the whole thing because it's pretty hilarious. Okay, so these are some mobile labs that I actually used because my practice is quite nomadic. Like I travel around the world giving these workshops, and so I had to figure out a way to make a mobile laboratory basically. But these images are kind of funny to me because some museums contacted me to display these mobile labs as art objects. So right now they're in a museum in Germany, and so on the workshop day on Thursday, I actually have a different lab. But on the left, you have the extraction lab, and then on the right side, you have the yeast biosensor lab. And then here are some images of past workshops I've done, and you can kind of see this very messy, chaotic, it's like a co-generative mess, right? And we're gonna create a similar mess on Thursday, but I really like to show this as a kind of counter analogy to the white sterile space of the laboratory and also the museum, right? It's also a very white sterile space. I really like process-oriented things. I like things to embrace messiness and this kind of cross-contaminating essence. So I want us to really dig into that on Thursday. So this is the 6-point plan for hormone queering resistance. I actually wrote this 2 or 3 years after I started open source estrogen, because in the beginning I just didn't really know what it would become, right? So step 1 and 2 and 3, it's pretty straightforward. It's all about demystifying knowledge, demystifying hormones, and this excavation, of the histories, the power structures, and so that's all really straightforward. And then when you get to step 4 and 5 and 6, then it starts to be more into xenofeminist territory. So number 4, rejecting glorifications of the natural. So being able to question these definitions of what is the normal body, what is the natural body. Number 5, undermining notions of purity, right? Using queering as embracing the multiverse of possibilities. This is something very present in my strategies. It's how can we resist the politics of purity? And then finally we get to number 6, which I have in bold because I really want to emphasize it, is to look at the microperformativity of hormones as not just a colonization, but as a collaboration. So to dig into that further, that brings me to part 2 of the talk, which is alien tendencies I wish to no longer hide. So I mentioned xenofeminism, right? So Back in 2016, I came across this scientific paper where they were hybridizing 2 species of fish, and then they accidentally created a hermaphrodite fish. And then they called it a hopeful monster in the title of the paper, which like really stuck out to me. And because basically this fish is able to self-reproduce when it can't find a mate, because it has both ovaries and testicles. So I thought like, okay, well, we all have queer bodies, right? Because we all have exposure to these harmful toxicities that are changing our physiology, changing our morphology. Okay, so I think we can just like all establish that we all have queer bodies. But why can't we also look at our bodies as being hopeful? We're kind of just stuck on this monster part, right? Because in my research, like I go on the internet a lot, and I always come across these articles or like these websites where, like this is just from a random blogger, but to summarize this article, he's basically saying, well, I don't think it's right that, you know, the government allows birth control pills to seep into the water supply because it's making all the men gay, and we need both men and women to propagate the human species. And maybe we should talk about this, you know, more than people crossing our borders. So this really stuck out to me because it's like, whoa, like you have homophobia, transphobia, and even xenophobia in the same article when we're talking about toxicities, right? And I'm not approaching this with any like judgment or shame. I mean, because the reality is that there are people who, you know, this is their cosmology, like this is what they truly believe. And it's like, I'm not like judging them or anything, but I'm more curious about where that fear and that panic comes from. Like, where is the fear of like your body changing outside of these definitions, right? Or like this kind of reproductive futurism, you know, like, oh, we need to protect like the male genitals or whatever. So as an artist, you know, interested in cultural discourse, like I wanted to go into this deeper. And then I came across this other really amazing book called Sexing the Body. I really encourage you to read this. But there is this illustration in the book which I think really summarizes this fear, right? This fear in action. So when a child is born with ambiguous genitalia, the doctor will actually perform a surgery to make the child female or male. And if you think about it, it's all just based on these arbitrary measurements, right? These numbers. So it's like, oh, the clitoris has to be between 0 and 1 centimeters to be a girl. The penis has to be between 2.5 and 4.5 centimeters to be a boy. And then my question is, well, who determines these numbers, right? Because it's definitely not us, right? Someone at the top, someone who has scientific authority is making these numbers. And so, you know, what happens when we decide, well, to frame this as a fiction rather than as an objective truth, right? And if these are, you know, just bodily fictions or somatic fictions, then why can't we create fictions of our own? And I think that's what biohacking allows us to do, because it's not just, you know, deconstructing and opening the black box, but it's also, you know, allowing the fictioning to happen, right? The worlding to happen. So when I'm talking about fictioning, worlding, and like creating, you know, collective strategies, you know, for living in a toxic world, I want us, again, to be really careful about falling back into those purity politics. Because this image, I think, really encapsulates what I mean by the purity politics, which is, you know, the dominant strategy is to just like clean up, right? Like we're just gonna round up all the trash and we're just gonna move it somewhere else where we can't see it. But what's really happening is that you're just moving it to like another land or another region that is more like disempowered and disenfranchised, and let them handle the toxicities. So it's really like you know, every time you clean something, you're just making something else dirty. Like if I just take a paper towel and I wipe, you know, a stain off the carpet, you know, like I just made the paper towel dirty, right? So that's kind of like our main strategy right now. And when I say like, you know, strategies that are not just reinforcing the purity politics, I'm thinking, you know, like in the xenofeminist way of like working within that alienation, right? Like this is, that trash right there, that is something alien to our environment. And I'm not proposing to just like clean it up, but I'm proposing to actually like work with it as if it's like our collaboration, right? So taking something like pollution and plastic as the starting point for the strategies we want to form. So that's when I started getting into more like performative strategies and like more like embodied kind of tactics. So I was collaborating with this tactical theater collective called the Aliens in Green. And they are like this counter-analogous entity to the Men in Black, because the Men in Black just go around erasing people's memories when they've seen an alien. But the Aliens in Green are saying like, okay, no, we want to actually show you how the planet is like this giant laboratory and we're all just being experimented on because of all these, you know, free-floating molecules that are, you know, like we are literally being experimented on. And the Aliens in Green are trying to show this through these workshops. So these workshops that we do are really intense. They go on for like 6 hours and sometimes 8 hours, and we work with like 25 different participants, and we have them do all kinds of crazy, they almost seem like arbitrary labor, like menial tasks, like chopping up food or like grating plastic and doing extractions, and also like milking the hormones out of the urine. And like we don't really give so much instruction, like we kind of leave everyone in the dark. And essentially what we're doing is like we're having everyone just like remix this, we call it the alien biocommons. So we're all just getting remixed like all the time. And the reason why that happens is because we're so porous. Like even like the barriers of our own skin, like it's porous. Like, and that's how the alienation starts, you know? It's because we have this open exchange with the environment. So like, how can you close that off? You know, like how can you have these definitions and these categories that are producing this like fantasy of like, you know, oh, we all have fixed bodies. Like we open up the biology textbook and there's like a female drawing and a male drawing and nothing else exists. You know, like how can you make that category if we are so porous and permeable? So that's what the Aliens in Green, like that's what we're trying to show through these long workshops. And another reason why they're so long is because we're actually, you know, we're quite aware that we're starting with fear and panic. Like we're starting with this very emotional affect that has to be neutralized, you know? So like we go through this very long, like, yeah, like a, you know, like a dramaturgy, right? Like that you see in a theater, like we're taking them through like this very, this act 1, act 2, act 3, so that that fear can get neutralized. And then this led to a personal project of mine called Molecular Queering Agency, where, is this gonna play? Oh my goodness. Okay, I think I have to do it manually. So here, this is a really interesting format that I started experimenting with. So it's technically a workshop, but it's a performance at the same time. So I call it a participatory performance. So I usually send out an open call, like I need 9 people. And I don't know who they are, and they never met me. And I ask everyone to just put on these uniforms. And when you put on these uniforms, you're essentially acting as representatives of the Molecular Queering Agency. And the whole idea is to trust ourselves and trust each other and trust me. And what I'm doing is I'm guiding them through this process of acknowledging the porosity of our bodies and the permeability of our bodies. And it's almost designed to be like a trauma releasing ritual. And this is also based off of the same urine hormone extraction protocol. So you'll see, like, from biohacking, like, this is the worlding that I'm talking about. You know, like, from that one urine extraction protocol, I've had so many iterations of it, like in the cooking show film, and now in this, like, culty worshiping performance. So it's like, that's, you know, that's what biohacking has opened up for me as an artist. But through this kind of performance, it's super weird, it's super strange, and I don't give them any instruction until the very end, and then we have this, this group discussion where we process all the strangeness together. Yeah. So here's some close-ups. So there's like the urine extraction column, and then they have these oxygen masks on. So those are actually connected to previously extracted hormones. And so there's this point in the performance where when we put on the masks, we are essentially consenting to living in this toxic world. Because if you think about it, toxicity is never really consensual, right? Like, we're just kind of born here and it's already polluted and we didn't really have a choice, like it's just already here. So the oxygen mask is to kind of play with that idea of consent, to say like, okay, I choose to be alienated and I choose to also acknowledge the alienness that's already inside me. So it was from this project, Molecular Queering Agency, that I kind of developed what I call, like, this is my artist toolkit. So in all of my presentations, like the one I'm giving now, and my performances and my workshops, I always refer back to this toolkit. So it's kind of like an outline or a structure. So it's always like, step one, toxicities. You live in an alien landscape that is colonized by hormones and desired purity, right? Step two, semiosis. You are already alien. You have microplastics in your blood and in your urine and in your fat cells. Step three, subjectivities. Do you want to be more alien than you already are? So that's like kind of where the consent comes in, right? This is also like what I use to, again, like neutralize that fear. Because like in the beginning, like I'm talking about all these toxicities, how it's all like irreversible, blah, 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 it's very scary. And then we get to the last point, which is like subjectivities. You know, you've acknowledged how porous you are. And it's like, now you have the choice, like, what do you want to be now? That takes me to part 3 of this talk, the genesis of caressing oceans. So my workshops now look more like this, so more site-specific. So this happened in Lisbon, actually this year in April. And what we did was we actually designed like a 3-day workshop, so we can be like much more like immersive, like in the toxic sites and everything and all the toxic materials. So here we are, we've arrived at a terraformed site where toxicities have leaked across body, space, and time. And then we start to scavenge for materials. So here's all of the trash that we collected. And then we bring them back to the venue, and then we put on these blindfolds, and we do this non-ocular sensing exercise. So essentially what we're doing is we're using hearing as a form of touching, as a form of tasting, as a form of seeing. You know, we're trying to activate all of these dormant senses, you know, because we're such an ocular-centric society. This part of the workshop is so exhausting because it's like you're trying to use muscles that you're not used to using. But from this exercise, we actually gain this new intimacy, right? Which comes with the knowledge that you gain about these alienated materials. And then in this last part, second to last part, we do a scenography building. So in this part, I give the participants just 1 hour, and the only rule is that you cannot speak. So it's kind of an exercise in like creating these negotiations in a somatic way, because, you know, like the purpose of the scenography building is essentially to construct a new world, right? It's a world building exercise. But everyone has a different idea of how the world should look like, right? Like we all have conflicting visions, and that's where the tension arises, and this is kind of an exercise in negotiating those tensions. And so we do that without speaking, and then after we're finished, we do a performance. So we actually invited people from the public to come and watch us perform in the space. And it really amazed me what happened in the scenography building, because what was created was kind of this combination of like a garden, a shrine, and like a shelter. So like all of these signifiers of a home, right? And I found it very interesting that, you know, out of these alienated materials and like this alienated site, we wanted to find a home out of that, right? If you asked me like how would I define an extraterrestrial, I would define it as, you know, any person or thing that's trying to find a home. So then I did this again in Lithuania. So I'm just gonna run you through the steps again. So here's the terraform site. We collected all of these thrown away materials. This is actually an old sewing factory. And then we did the scenography building. And then this was the final scenography. And then recently I was asked to do this workshop in 2 hours. So taking a 3-day workshop and condensing it down to 2 hours. So I'm just gonna show a short video of the performance part. But we didn't do the scavenging, like we just had the materials provided to us already. But we did the non-ocular sensing, and then we did the scenography building, and then this video I'm going to show now is the performance part. title, morphogenesis, it comes from this notion that, you know, molecules morph us as much as we morph them. And in these performances, we're really trying to create a dramaturgy out of this biochemical becoming, right? Like we are becoming with these molecules, we are being co-produced by these molecules. It really, it takes the notion of like I'm just this sovereign body that's being invaded by a toxicity. Like it really tries to break apart that model and make it more as like this co-productive and emergent process, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to illustrate with this performance. Like I'm coaching everyone through the process, and I'm telling them, I'm giving them a narrative to act out and everything. And I'm trying to get into this emergent process that happens, right? This very co-generative potential that we all have, right? So in this last part, when we do the performance, it's also this process of confronting, like you have this confrontation of like, oh, this is the last time I will be in this world that I just constructed, right? Because all of this is temporary, right? Like you go through this whole process of like gaining intimacy with your materials and then constructing a scenography in this new world, and then suddenly it's like, it's gonna vanish now. So I just told everyone like, you have your last 20 minutes in paradise now. And I just gave them microphones and I just let them do whatever they want. And so this is kind of the output of that performance. So that's why I feel like I have to incorporate this last step as a very crucial step, because it's like, how do you want to be in your last minutes of paradise? So I think this is my last slide. Yeah, okay, I'm finished, thank you. Oh, sorry, I wish we had more time, sorry. Yeah.
I have a question, like, the focus here is on, like, estrogen and, you know, quote-unquote feminizing hormones, and I wonder what in the science or the culture or in the way that, you know, industrial pollution is structured, would there be potential futures for, like, androgenic hormones, so-called androgenic hormones, the same effect? Is that another direction? Because I think, like, there's many directions you could take it if you're, like, actively structuring your own bodily experience. That might be not the opposite effect, you know?
You mean like testosterone mimicking compounds? Yeah, that's really interesting because I've gotten this question before, like how come there's not any testosterone mimicking or like xenotestosterones? And it has to do with that promiscuity of the estrogen receptor. And weirdly, the testosterone receptor is much more selective. So that's why you don't have like, androgen disruption. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, yeah. Yeah.
I have a similar question, which is, you know, you're doing so many wonderful, amazing things. Thank you so much for sharing all of it. But one of the many interventions that you're doing is also sort of geopolitical, right? And you talked about that really interestingly in the beginning by sort of saying how important it was to have a biohacking conference in Indonesia rather than in Europe or something. So I'm wondering sort of like in the way that you were just asked about sort of potentially developing hacking like male identified genes. I'm wondering what you thought about biohacking race.
Race. I mean, how would you define race, right? I mean, like I actually have artist friends who are working a lot with melanin and melatonin as a way to hack the symbolisms of race and this kind of like how color is assigned to races, like how this body became classified as a yellow body, you know? So for sure, yeah, like hacking melanin is a way to do that. But there's also so many other signifiers of race, you know? So it's really, yeah, like a really deep subject.
Yeah, I mean, I would never want to sort of like say that race is like a harder thing for all the reasons that you're pointing out about gender. And so I would love to see
Yeah.
So you mentioned like the doctor has the scale for the whatever we're working with, but also like you said like each like urine has its own like pheromone or hormone associated with it. So why doesn't the doctor do like a urine test on the little person to figure out what they are, or what they're co-doing? So because like you say like they could either go to girl or boy depending on like where they fall on the scale, right? So and like if there's surgery needed, why don't they just do that test?
Well, the surgery is because their genitalia is ambiguous, and then they want to, like, quote unquote, correct that body to be a female accepted body or like a male accepted body. They do take hormones. They measure hormones through the blood because it's technically like more accurate, but I still don't think it's that accurate because what you're doing is you're just taking a snapshot, right? Like it can change like the next hour. Like your whole body composition could change at any moment, and that's kind of what I mean by this this porosity or like this kind of glitching aspect to all of our bodies, right? We're never really just like a fixed, closed system. So, but yeah, lots of things can be found from the urine. Like they used to do medical diagnoses, like back in the medieval ages. You know, they'll look at the color of your urine, you know, essentially. So yeah, a lot of information is in there for sure. Yeah, John?
You had talked about education, sort of, and you said, well, if I could have been educated, I would take this direction. And I, of course, have been thinking about education for a fairly long time, also being a parent. And just thought, almost that you're advocating for some sort of, we keep extending the educational system because we seem to know more or need to educate more. But maybe what you're suggesting is a longer time, kind of in the sandbox or dirt pile type of education, but also something maybe more to do with disobedience.
Yes.
And I'm sorry I'm being so vague, but I'm trying to kind of put together a difficult question.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm more advocating for a holistic approach or a more cross-contaminating approach, because I think what's happening now is like we want to get more and more specialized, and that's fine, like that's okay, but like it doesn't have to get that specialized. Like it can, or it's specialized in a way that is like for the goal of publishing papers, you know. So that system is what made me not want to be a scientist, because
it's
I
like
actually
specialization being some sort of purity.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a way, like the way that disciplines are compartmentalized, you know, you have biology separated from art, that is a form of purity that's being enforced. Along with, you know, the gender binary and like the nature culture binary, you know, like those are all compartmentalizations, those are all examples of purity in action. And I'm proposing to like dissolve those borders, you know, to really like remix and kind of like a jam session, because I wrote in the definition like this kind of jamming, right? What I came across a lot in these hacking gatherings was there was always some jam session with like DIY synthesizers and like all of these noise instruments, and that's really what I see is happening with biohacking. Like you have everyone with like their own kind of, like this is my instrument, this is what I'm good at, this is my background, but then like everyone comes together and starts producing a song, and it's like, it's emergent, you know, it's like these are all things that you can't necessarily define or measure, or, you know, like that's the experiential knowledge that is being produced. And that's so special, you know, that's like something that you don't normally get when you just have like one expert telling you what to do or how to think, you know. So yeah, so that's why my workshops are getting super like messy and more like embodied like this, because I feel like I can pull more out of the participants rather than just like this is how you extract the hormones. You know, like it's very didactic, you know, so I prefer this more messy approach. Yeah. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
So, not to say that I'm not interested in everything that like love your presentation, but I'm so curious about your computer's background. It's very cyber, and the way you dress is also like, I'm using the terms that I know, and I've seen like a lot of cyberpunk, so excuse me, but like very streetwear and like the things that you're interested in and the things that you are interested in are so interesting for me. Like I'm curious about how you see your background in your fashion and how you display your art and your interests and how they come together.
Is this an aesthetics question? Okay. I don't know. My sense of style. Or what do you mean by how I identify or my background or?
Identify more so, I was more so focused on like aesthetics and I guess like your style and your art are very vast.
Like, you know, is there a visual language that comes to your interest, and what informs your interest, and what's the appearance of this?
There's a lot of projects that I didn't show because I also make, you know, things that go in a museum, you know, like I also make that kind of stuff. And it wasn't shown here because I focused on the hormone hacking. But I would say kind of a continuity, a visual continuity in my work has a lot to do with appropriating institutions or spaces. Like I have lots of installations where I'm appropriating a clinic, or I'm appropriating a cooking show, or I'm appropriating a fitness gym, or you know, like, or appropriating a laboratory. So I like to work within these institutional spaces in order to deconstruct them, very much in the way that Critical Art Ensemble and Sub Rosa were doing. Right, because these are also spaces where, you know, these normative definitions are produced. So, you know, I like to subvert those spaces. So, yeah. But normally, like, I would consider myself more like a research-based artist. Like the medium and the visual language usually comes later. Like, yeah, it's not really like a priority in my work, but yeah. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I think we have to wrap it up, unfortunately. So,
There was one more. Can we finish with one more?
you can try it, sure.
I just wanted to ask, like, for the last video that you showed us, you as like the researcher, and you as like, you kind of let everybody just do what they want. What did you interpret for like the last video? Like, as the person that's extracting information and trying to understand it, what was your interpretation?
Of this last performance?
Yeah.
I had the sense that for the participants, it was almost like a goodbye letter to this world that they constructed. And they even like tore it apart, and then the moment it got torn apart, the person on the microphone like made these sounds like it was painful, you know? So I felt like there was this sense of intimacy and connectedness, like with the participants, with each other, and also with the materials. So it was almost like they were saying goodbye, like, to this whole world. So, again, like, this all happened in 2 hours. Like, it's amazing how much can be produced with 10 people in 2 hours. So, yeah, I definitely want to explore this format more often. Yeah.
All right.